All right, I just couldn't resist but make a video about something topical like the Iowa caucuses. So the phrase I've seen in the reporting has been a coding issue. This does not begin to explain the problems going on with what happened with this Iowa caucus app rollout. So let's approach this like I would approach another project. That's how I've been thinking about this. What are my requirements for this project? I've got to build an app for the caucuses. It's got to be able to, one, gather data from 1,681 precincts. The captains have to log in and provide now the info from three tallies, I guess, thanks to Bernie Sanders and those reforms from 2016. The app needs to communicate that raw data to the headquarters, presumably at the state level. It seems like it was connecting directly from each one of these 1,681 nodes back up to HQ. It's not clear to me from reading, and I've read reports now from CNN, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, The Verge, Vox, Vice's Motherboard. It's not clear if the app was supposed to tabulate all of this or do some sort of addition or figure out delegate counts. I don't know how all that stuff works, and I didn't want to get into the esoteric math of how the Iowa caucuses work, but maybe there's some calculation that goes on there. It seems like maybe that's where the app was screwing up, or just displaying the data as entered. And finally, the app has to be secure, right? That means, in the broadest way, only the precinct captains can enter the data, and only the state party can view or tabulate that data. Um, what are the constraints you're working under? Now, in this case, Shadow Incorporated, who took this contract, was working under incredible constraints. According to the New York Times, they had less than 2 months to develop this app, which I can't begin to state how absurd as a deadline that is. They were paid a total of $63,000. If you would offer me $63,000 to do this, I would have said I wouldn't do it for 10 times the amount of money, because I know that it's going to be a colossal disaster and blow up in my face. And, Shadow, not all good publicity, or not all publicity is good publicity, right? I think they're learning that today. And the final constraint, and the most vicious of all these constraints, is that the users are volunteers. There are 1,681 of them, and a lot of them are going to be elderly people who are not going to be savvy about using this app. I think that basically kills the project. You cannot succeed under these conditions. You cannot succeed with less than 2 months. That's one reason to 100% turn down the contract. $63,000, not enough to do the required testing, especially field testing with 1,700 people. Turn down the contract. And the majority of your users are going to be elderly folks, and you don't have time to train them. Again, kill it. You should not move forward with the project. So let's break down all the problems that happened with this thing that was a disaster. It was dead on arrival. Like, this was never going to work out. But let's go into all the ways in this post-mortem that this did not work out. According to New York Times, again, in the end, only 1/4 of the 1,700, it's 1,681 or whatever, according to Wikipedia, precinct chairs could successfully download and install the app. And the New York Times reports this according to a Democratic consultant who spoke on the condition of anonymity to avoid losing work. So I guess reporting that only 1/4 of precinct chairs could download this thing is enough to get you, to make you persona non grata. You can no longer work in Democratic Party politics if you just tell the truth about this disaster. Um, the New York Times reported, and so much of this reveals that people do not know what they're talking about when they're talking about these applications. They reported that you had to, quote, it involved circumventing security to install the app. When I saw that, I thought, okay, they mean that they're side loading an app. Side loading an app is not going through the app store, so you're not downloading it, I guess, from that official source. They call it side loading because you're bringing it in from, let's say, a corporate server. Um, you might do this if you work for like Delta Airlines and you have some app that only captains have access to so that they can check into something. I don't know. I'm making something up there, but there's lots of different corporate apps like this where, because they're not using some generic or some publicly available application. Like they're not using Google Docs, but they still have like spreadsheets or data that they have to access. And it's through a custom interface, but they're not going to put that on the App Store, download here, because it's only supposed to be available to their employees. So it often involves this side loading. It means that there's some sort of process for putting a signature on that to indicate that it's a valid app. Anyway, these are usually installed by IT professionals. If you work at a place that uses some app like this, your IT pro is going to give you your phone with that loaded on. It has a separate updating process. So when I saw circumventing security, I thought, okay, they're side loading this app on there. So now you've taken the difficulty level from download an app on your phone, which for a lot of the elderly volunteers is going to already be throw my hands up too much. I don't know. I got to get the grandkids to do this. Now you're saying not only do you have to download an app, you have to sideload the app, which means you're going to have to download a testing suite. So Motherboard confirmed this in their reporting. They said that the platform used was TestFairy. Now this is a side-loading app testing suite that's available for iOS and Android. Um, so and when Motherboard tried to download the app, and I don't know how they got a hold of the app, they would have had to have gotten an invitation, maybe forwarded to them from one of the Democratic County chair people or caucus leaders. And they installed it on two different Android phones, and they could only get it to even launch on one of the two Android phones it's installed on. So huge issues there. According to the Wall Street Journal, there were other significant problems, like at some of the caucus sites, simply no internet access. So even if you had the app, you managed to download it, you got it installed on the phone ahead of time, and it was only available, by the way, on January 31st. So that would have been the previous Friday. So 3 days ahead of time. So if you got it installed, you get to the caucus site, you have like a poor 3G connection or nothing at all. The app's useless to you. So welcome to the joy of bring your own device, right? You try to distribute an app to people. They're all using their own devices from at home. This is how things go. This is why IT departments like to give everybody the same thing, the same PC laptop, the same Apple laptop, the same Chromebook, whatever it is. Bring your own device, and doing things in the most haphazard way like this is just crazy. Another interesting tidbit I learned here. According to CNN, the state party chair, Troy Price, said the application's reporting issues did not impact the ability of precinct chairs to report data accurately. I think this has to be just taken as completely false, in that if you enter information into an application and then it shows you that information, and that information is different than what you just entered, that does affect your ability to report. So they're entering 3 sets of data. I don't know how the sequence went as they went through the app, but if I enter the information in on page 1 and it spits back a receipt to me and that receipt is wrong, it's giving me the wrong information, I'm not going to proceed on to steps 2 or 3. Or I'm going to be soon texting in despair, in duress, to people at the party. The app is not collecting the information correctly. Now, little did they know, the app did seem to collect the information correctly. At least that's what Shadow has said. It just failed to report it back to people correctly. But how is anyone to know? So the data is only as good as what it tells you it is, right? Or the person's perception of if it's reporting accurately is informed by the user interface. If the user interface is giving you back the wrong information, you can only assume that it's gathered the wrong information. So I don't think Troy Price's explanation here is quite accurate. It does impact your ability to report data if you spit back the wrong data. Another interesting bit of reporting on this. Shadow posted on Tuesday, "We will apply the lessons learned in the future and have already corrected the underlying technology issue." So that I want to say is 1000% totally false. They have not corrected the underlying technology issues because the underlying technology issues are myriad, and many of them are just day late and dollar short sort of things. So here are the mistakes that they made. They not only had a coding issue, they definitely seemed to have that, but that was not the only thing. The first issues that they had were deployment. So you decided to deploy through a non-standard way, not using the App Store, using sideloading. You've taken the technical difficulty and just ramped it up. Older volunteers already don't want to download apps. Now you're telling them to download a testing suite to sideload an app. Crazy. So your deployment methodology, totally wrong. This would have been solved by testing. If you had tested it with even a handful of these precinct chairs, they would have said, no, I can't do this. And it would have been revealed to you, this is a flawed design. Of course, you would have had to start the process more than 2 months ahead of time. And training and using in the field would have revealed that even if you were able to get the app and you have it at the Caucus site, the app is useless to you if you can't connect to the internet. And in large parts of rural Iowa, I'm sure it's the case. I live in rural New Hampshire. Thank God we're not going to use this app for our primary a week from now. But here, it depends where you are. You may or may not have a good data connection. So it was just doomed from the outset, like I say. So the deployment was flawed, but the app itself was flawed. And again, testing would have revealed this. So you can't say we've already corrected the underlying technology issue because your technology issues were all over the place. All right. The other notes I've taken on this, extremely bad takes from the media on this. A thing I've seen over and over again. This is the problem with electronic voting, has been one of the takes. This is not electronic voting. This is not electronic voting machines that you see in polling places. This was a means of reporting data, and we have good, reliable means of reporting data. This was just a superbly bad execution of this. It was failed from the outset. It was a bad thing for the Iowa Democratic Party to ask for, and as little time as it did. It was stupid for the technology company to take it on. It was stupid to take it on at only $63,000. They didn't have the resources to do it. But the idea that this is the problem with electronic voting is completely false. I've also seen the take of we should go back to using paper. Maybe that's a good idea. But I'd like to see a failure of a well-tested, well-coded app with extensive field testing and training. If that fails, if we can't get through that, something that's actually followed a professional course of development, then we have a great argument for this new technology just doesn't work. But you can't say that here. This is like, testing out saying that the horseless carriage, these newfangled automobiles, are no good because the guy behind the wheel was drunk, one of the wheels was missing, and the car was on fire at the time when we tested it. Okay, yeah, a horse is going to look superior according to that. So this is just extremely bad execution. You can't say that conceptually the whole idea is just wrong based on this. Now this is great. Whenever a technology thing fails like this, people in the media have to go out and find somebody who's a technological expert. They never talk to a successful app developer. I haven't seen a successful app developer in any one of the stories I've read, and I read 10 stories about this before I started this video. They go out and talk to David Jefferson, a computer science at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Great. This is like, a car blows up and they go talk to a chemical engineer. It has nothing to do with automobile engineering, right? This guy's a computer scientist, so he works with computers, but there's a broad range of things you can work with computers on. And this is, app development is not this guy's expertise. He made some fair points. He said, you should not deploy a system that hasn't gone through rigorous and scaled testing. True. And you should not deploy a system whose architecture and technical details are secret. Now, this is where I sort of disagree with him. Oh, he also made the point that internet-based systems can be extremely fragile. Now, well, that's true. They're not necessarily extremely fragile. Again, bad systems are fragile. Tested and vetted systems can be very robust. We do use the internet for things like banking. We transfer tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars via electronic systems. They're reliable and robust. They work every day to keep the global economy moving along. But his last point, architecture and technical details can remain a secret so long as there is, he says that the architecture and technological details shouldn't be a secret. security through obscurity is a good idea here. I don't know that it would be a wise idea to take an app like this, if an app like this should even exist, and that's another question, and to make it open source. Maybe you make it open source after the fact, something like this, so people can audit. Um, but what the black box of the code is doing doesn't strike me to be something that's everybody needs to be privy to, so long as there's still a paper trail and that everyone involved can audit the whole process afterwards. It seems to me like the goal of the software was tabulate the result quickly. And if the fear is, ooh, the software could have been suppressing votes or changing the tally somehow and defrauding the American people of a fair election, the way to guard against that is not necessarily to open the code up. Again, maybe that's an idea that you could proceed with, but if the totals are all public information, which they are, and all of the precinct chairs have their own individual receipts, they can see, here's my receipt. Does that match the spreadsheet that they published at the end of the whole thing? Yep, my numbers are there. There's a check on the system. Like, the code does not have to be open so long as the raw data is out there still in the hands of the individuals who collected it and the tabulation is open and available for all to see. Okay, so I thought about best practices. I mean, I think we've already talked about this a little bit, but how would you avoid this in the future? If you insisted on doing this app, which I think is foolish, you could roll it out months in advance. You would roll it out via the default distribution pass, and that would mean giving yourself plenty of time, like start this a year in advance, get it approved by the App Store, roll it out to a handful of people in the Iowa Democratic Party who can download it to their phones and test it out and see if it's working. So you start with limited tests like that to make sure that things like, I don't know, the data that you entered in is reflected back to you accurately. Then I would run multiple tests with actual users at actual locations. Now, you could, again, do this at small samples, but eventually you're going to have to do it with everybody because it's going to stick out where it's not going to work. You could still maybe end up using the app for 70, 80% of locations, something, but 20% of them, you know, the app's not going to work. And then you come up with a plan to compensate for that on game day, right? But to do this requires more than $63,000. That's why the contract shouldn't have been taken by Shadow. They should have said, sorry, this is a $250,000 job. We're not going to take the contract. You ought to use whatever the old system is that you use that, I don't know, for as long as I've been alive and paying attention to politics, which was since I was like 8 years old in 1990, or 19, I guess 92 was the first presidential cycle I really watched. The Iowa caucuses got their results in. Sometimes it was later in the evening, but it didn't take an extra day because some app threw a monkey wrench into the whole works. So I thought about possible better approaches for this. If you simply just have a connection restraint, if that's one of the constraints you're operating under, just people aren't going to be able to access a data connection reliably, I would rely on phones for mobile reporting. And this, again, this is spitballing. There could be a million problems with this plan, but clearly the existing plan was a massive failure. But I would rely on those phones. I would create a web app or another interface for the county level or some other mid-level in between to try to reduce the total number of users from the 1,681 to some manageable amount. There's 99 counties in Iowa. 99 users seems like a much more manageable number than 1,681. It's about 1/17th the amount of people. So that would require a lot less training, fewer people to train. It'd be practical to test in advance, and it uses a platform that doesn't require app installation. You just have to visit a website. So then you can think of the system working as individual precinct chairs are calling their county chair, or whatever the proper word is for the county person who's entering all this stuff in. They say the totals to you, you repeat the totals back to them. They confirm that and they repeat the totals to you again. You do some sort of 1, 2, 3 check. All the information's conveyed accurately. You'd still gain considerable amount of speed in the reporting. It'd be put into some electronic system where you could now deal with the raw numbers and tabulate them as you need to. But you would avoid 1,700 people acting as data entry people, and you'd get it down to 99 who you could train in advance. You could then drive the results to the county chairs as a check on the system. So you get that information reported in by phone, but pretty soon you have physical copies in your hands and you can compare that again. So you have another check on the system. And then you could have the county chairs photograph and send all that information in to the state HQ so that they've got now electronically entered data that's pretty reliable, plus uh, plus at least photos if they can't physically get those things. And ultimately, you physically get those things into the state party and you triple check everything after the results have presumably been made public before this. But so this is the disaster of the Iowa caucuses. It's a classic example of moving way too fast on app development, asking technology people to do way too much. The technology people involved, Shadow Incorporated in this case, taking on a contract that was completely unrealistic, doomed to fail from the beginning on way too short of a timeline, didn't build in any testing, didn't use normal deployment channels, and didn't take into account any of the realities of the users involved. So this is just a failure on every level. It speaks to the lack of professionalism by the contractor, but also the unrealistic expectations put on contractors by vendors, or by customers, which is why as contractors, as professionals, we just need to say no. So this was a no contract, sorry, no deal sort of situation. But I guess somebody really needed the 63,000. So unfortunately, this blew up in a really big way. Um, but it's a cautionary tale. I hope everybody learned a lesson here and that in the future you take technology projects seriously. Well, thanks for entertaining me on this. I'm Cord Bloomquist with Tall Street Digital. Keep growing.